No one wanted her, not with 5 children and another on the way. But when Ruth knocked, desperate and alone, Eli Harper saw something no one else did. Not a burden, a family. And once he opened his door, neither of them would be the same again. The knock was firm, not hesitant, not desperate. Just firm, like she had nothing left to lose. Eli Harper stood from his worn chair slowly, listening as the wind slapped dust against the frame of the house. Dusk was falling hard, dragging shadows. Long across the porch and out here in the canyons, no one knocked unless they had a damn good reason. When he opened the door, he expected to find a traveler, maybe a lost rider. But instead, he saw her. A woman, tall, thin, face sunburned and lined with exhaustion, stood there with a child on each side of her, a baby on her hip, and 2 more behind her. Her dress was faded, stained with road dust, stretched thin over a belly that showed clear signs of a 6th on the way. She didn't flinch. She didn't beg. She just said, "We got turned away from Cotton Ridge. They said we were too many mouths." Eli looked from her face to the children. The oldest, a boy of maybe 10, kept his chin up, but his eyes down. Beside him, a girl gripped his arm tightly, maybe 8 or 9. The baby on the woman's hip was sucking noiselessly on her knuckle, eyes half-lidded and drowsy. The youngest 2 clung to the back of her skirts, one thumb in his mouth, the other sniffling quietly. Eli said nothing for a moment. Then he opened the door wider and stepped back. "Get inside. Ain't no one sleeps out in this wind." The woman didn't hesitate. She ushered the children in quickly, not with panic, but with efficiency. This wasn't her first night seeking shelter. She moved like a woman who had been turned away too many times to count, and didn't expect this roof to last long either. But the way her shoulders dropped, just slightly, as the warmth of the hearth reached them, told Eli more than any words. She wasn't relieved. Not yet, just less braced. Eli watched as the kids clustered near the fireplace. The boy helped the smallest out of his too thin coat. The girl found a blanket and wrapped it around the baby without being asked. None of them asked for food. None cried. They just sat, quiet and wide-eyed, like deer in a clearing too used to gunshots. "What's your name?" Eli asked finally. She looked over, brushing hair from her face. "Ruth. Ruth Gable. These are my children. Adam, Beth, Levi, Ruthie, and Joe. And this one." She rested her hand on her belly. "We ain't named yet. Guess I was waiting to see if it made it here first." Her voice didn't tremble. It cracked in places, but not from emotion, from thirst. Eli poured a tin cup of water and handed it to her. She took it without ceremony, sipped once, then passed it to her eldest, Adam, who passed it down the line until Joe, the youngest, finished it. Then she handed the cup back. "You got folks?" Eli asked, not unkindly. "Not anymore," Ruth replied. "And even when I did, 5 kids, and no man, scares off kin quicker than disease." Eli didn't flinch. He just nodded and stepped into the kitchen, ladling stew into chipped bowls. "Food's not much, but it's warm." He said it like a statement, not an offer. Ruth helped pass it out without asking. Her hands shook slightly, but she didn't sit until each child had their share. Only then did she take her own. They ate in silence, broken only by the sound of spoons scraping tin and soft, careful chewing. Later, when the children slept curled, on pallets near the fire, Eli pulled out the only extra blanket he had and laid it on the bench. Ruth sat down slowly, stretching her back. "Thank you," she said after a long silence. "You didn't have to let us in." "No," Eli agreed. "I didn't." Ruth waited, as if expecting him to say more. But he didn't. She looked at him then, really looked. Eli Harper was in his 40s, maybe older, face lined by years in the sun. He had a limp when he walked, favoring his left side, and a permanent squint in one eye like someone who'd seen one too many gunfights and walked away from all of them. His cabin was simple, clean, lived in. No sign of another woman, or child, or any life but his own. A man alone in the world. You ever been a father? She asked suddenly. Eli's mouth twitched. Not a smile, closer to a flinch. Once, he said simply. A long time ago. Then you know what it's like, Ruth said quietly. To lose more than just a person. To lose what the world was supposed to be. Eli didn't answer. He just poured her a second helping of stew. That night, a coyote howled from the canyon ridge, and Joe stirred in his sleep, whimpering. Ruth moved instantly, scooping the boy into her arms, whispering soft comforts into his ear. Eli watched from the shadows of the kitchen, his hands still, his eyes unmoving. He'd never heard someone whisper like that, like the sound alone was a shield. The next morning, Ruth was already up when Eli came in from chopping wood. She was sweeping the floor with one of his old brooms, and the children were seated in a line, folding small rags and sorting dry beans, like it was a game. "We don't sit idle," she said when she saw his raised brow. "Idles when the dark thoughts come." Eli grunted and set down the kindling. It went on like that for 3 days. Ruth never asked to stay. She didn't have to. She acted like the cabin was borrowed land, something she'd repay in work and order. The children adapted fast. Adam took to the barn, checking on the chickens, brushing down Eli's old mule without being told. Beth helped cook. Levi followed, Eli like a shadow. Ruthie and Joe collected kindling in small hands, proud when they brought back armfuls. It felt normal. Too normal. Eli knew enough to be suspicious of peace. It was on the 4th night that it came. A hard knock at the door. Fast. Loud, urgent. Ruth froze where she was, baby Ruthie in her lap, eyes snapping to Eli. He was already moving, hand brushing the rifle by the mantel as he stepped toward the door. He opened it slowly. 3 men stood there, one tall and lean, with a moustache, like a blade. The others looked rough, one with a busted lip, the other with hands too clean for dirt work. The leader smiled, all teeth and cold eyes. Heard a woman pass through Cotton Ridge. Got herself a litter of children. Wondered if she ended up here. Eli didn't blink. "What's it to you?" The man shrugged. "She's got debts. Belongs to a man who paid for her way west. She ran off with his coin and his kid." Ruth stepped into view. "I didn't take anything but what was mine." Her voice was quiet but clear. The children stood behind her like a wall. The man's smile widened. "Ain't what he says. Says he wants his property back." Eli stepped forward, hand still resting on the doorframe. "Ain't nothing here that belongs to him." "Oh?" The man's tone soured. "Then maybe we should come in, check ourselves." Eli didn't raise his voice, didn't even move, just said, "Try it." A silence stretched. Then the man laughed, stepping back from the threshold. "We'll be back, with law this time, or something close enough." When they were gone, Ruth sagged against the wall. Her hands shook. Eli didn't speak. He just locked the door and stood guard until the fire died down. She hadn't cried. Not once. But as she sat near the sleeping children, fingers gripping the edge of the bench hard enough to turn her knuckles white, Eli saw the crack in her armor. And he knew one thing for sure. Whatever story Ruth Gable carried, it wasn't over. The next morning came too fast. The dawn was dull and sullen, streaking the sky in grey before the sun could decide whether to shine. Ruth was already awake, kneeling beside the stove, coaxing the fire to life with the same steady patience she used with her children. Her sleeves were rolled, her eyes puffy from sleep she hadn't truly had. Eli stood in the doorway a moment, watching her. He wasn't sure what struck him harder, that she moved like this had always been her home, or that it hadn't. He shifted his weight, and the board beneath his heel creaked. Ruth turned at once, but there was no fear in her eyes now. Just tired, gratitude. "They'll come back," she said quietly. Eli didn't need to ask who. He stepped fully into the room, rubbing at the scruff on his jaw. Yeah, and likely not alone. Adam stirred from the floor pallet and sat up without a sound. Ruthie rolled into Beth's lap, murmuring something soft, and Joe grunted, eyes still half closed. The air in the cabin was still, but it crackled with the weight of anticipation, as if they all knew time had turned against them, even if none of them said it aloud. "They said you stole from him," Eli said, not accusing, not doubtful, just a quiet prompt. Ruth nodded once. "I took what he owed me. And more importantly, I took what he would have broken." She stood and walked toward the basin, pouring water over her hands, scrubbing them until they were red. "His name's Cyrus Vane. You probably heard it. Freight runner out of Kansas, used to be some kind of preacher before the gold dried up. And he realized people pay more for vice than virtue." Eli watched her closely, waiting. "I worked for him," she said. "Cleaning, cooking. He was charming at first. Had a way of talking that made you feel small, but safe. Said he'd marry me when the time came. Then Adam got sick, real sick. And when I asked for help with the doctor's fees, he told me a debt's a debt, even the lives of children." She looked away. That was the first time he hit me. The room was quiet except for the soft sound of Beth braiding Ruthie's hair. The tension hummed in the floorboards, in the cracked window glass, in Eli's clenched fists. "Last winter he made it clear," Ruth continued. "He didn't want the children, just me. Said I was pretty enough if I kept my mouth shut and my skirts tight. But the kids made me too hard to sell." She let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Said he'd find homes for them, work farms, probably worse. So I waited for spring, packed what I could, and left in the dead of night. He's been looking for me ever since." Eli turned, walked to the mantel, and picked up his rifle. He checked the chamber, reloaded, then leaned it against the wall by the door. "I ain't the law," he said, "and I don't pretend to be. But I don't hand women and children over to cowards who call themselves men." That was the only promise he gave, and it was enough. By midday, the wind had picked up. Joe clung to Ruth's skirt as they all worked. Around the cabin, there was no time to hide, not properly. Instead, they reinforced. Eli showed Adam how to hammer slats across the windows, and Beth rolled up bedding to create makeshift barriers at the back room entrance. Levi helped carry stones to shore up the porch. Ruth cooked what could last, packed small bags for each of the children. She didn't ask what would happen if the men returned with more than threats. She didn't ask because she already knew. At sundown, they came. This time on horses, 5 men, not 3. 2 with rifles cradled across their saddles, one with a red bandana tied around his neck like a badge of authority. And Cyrus Vane in the center, seated tall on a dark gelding, eyes like cold water. His face was clean, too clean, the kind that got scrubbed for church on Sunday but never for remorse. His coat was fine, unbuttoned just enough to show off the gold chain at his vest. He didn't look like a freight runner. He looked like a banker with dirt under his fingernails. Eli stood on the porch, rifle across his arms. "You're not welcome here." Cyrus didn't even blink. "And yet here I am." He dismounted slow, graceful. The others followed, more like wolves than men. "Ruth!" he called out, not loud, not aggressive, almost pleasant. "You forgot your vows." Ruth stepped forward, standing just behind Eli. "I never made any." Cyrus tilted his head. "You left without permission. Took my child." "She's not yours," Ruth snapped. "None of them are. You were never their father. You were barely even a shadow." Cyrus smiled, as if she were a pet barking at thunder. "The law says otherwise." Eli spoke before she could. "That's a mighty confident claim to make without a sheriff present." "Oh, but I brought one." Cyrus motioned to the man with the red bandana. Deputized in Hollow Creek last year. Sheriff's gone now, but the badge is real. Badges don't make men, Eli said. Neither does money. Cyrus's smile broke, just for a second. I don't want a shootout, Mr. Harper. I came to collect what's mine. I got papers if you want to see them. You got a soul too, I assume. Don't see that either. The standoff stretched like wire pulled tight. The children watched from the window, eyes wide. Beth clutched Ruthie's hand. Joe pressed his face against Levi's back. Ruth didn't move. Eli didn't either. Then Cyrus took one step forward. You think you can hold out here forever? You're alone, Harper. 1 man against 5. Eli's voice was quiet. I'm not alone. The rifle cracked before anyone saw it raised. Dirt sprayed up at Cyrus's feet. Adam stood at the barn door, hands shaking, clutching the old revolver Eli had given him an hour earlier. His jaw was clenched, eyes wet, but he didn't back down. You stay away from my mother, he shouted, voice cracking. You touch her, and I'll shoot. For a second, no one moved. Then Ruth stepped in front of Adam, slowly lowering his gun with her hand. Not yet, she whispered. Cyrus chuckled, mean and low. Training the brats to kill. For you, that's fitting. Eli raised his voice finally. You've had your say. Now leave. Next time you cross my land, there won't be a warning shot. Cyrus looked him over like a man appraising livestock, measuring risk against reward. Then, with a shrug that felt colder than steel, he turned. Back to his horse. You've got until sundown tomorrow, he said. I'm coming back, and if she's not outside waiting, I'll burn this place to the ground with all of you inside. He left in a cloud of dust, his men close behind, laughing like it was a game. That night the cabin felt smaller. The fire couldn't warm the edges of fear that clung to the walls. Ruth sat in the kitchen, face in her hands. Eli poured 2 cups of whiskey and slid one toward her. She didn't touch it. What do we do? She whispered. If he comes back. He will, Eli said. But so will I. She looked up. What if we run? You won't make it far. Not with 5 kids and a baby coming. Ruth closed. Her eyes. I can't lose them. I'd rather die than lose them. Eli stared at the flame flickering in the lantern. Then we don't lose. When the sun rose again, the ground was dry. The wind was hot, and the tension was heavier than ever. Eli sent Levi and Joe to stay with a neighbor 2 miles down. Adam begged to stay. Beth wouldn't leave her mother. Ruth made no argument, just kissed each child as if she might never again. They spent the morning building barricades, the afternoon loading weapons. At twilight, a dust trail rose on the horizon. Cyrus had returned. And this time, he wasn't laughing. They came like men who didn't think they could be stopped. Not quietly, not cautiously. No creeping through the trees or hiding in brush. 5 horses thundered down the hill as if they meant to split the earth. Cyrus Vane riding at the head, like some twisted general returning to collect a lost piece of his kingdom. The sun bled behind them, low and brutal, stretching their shadows across the dust like claws. Eli stood alone on the porch, rifle in his arms, eyes steady. Ruth was inside, with Adam and Beth, the front windows boarded. The children crouched low with instructions to run, only if the house caught fire. The baby hadn't stirred once. Ruth had kissed her forehead an hour before and whispered that no matter what, her name would be Mercy. If they lived, she'd earn it. And if they didn't, maybe someone would say it kindly one day. Cyrus dismounted, slowly, reins in hand, like he had all the time in the world. The 4 men with him stayed mounted this time, rifles across their laps, faces smug and sunburnt. One had a long scar down his cheek, another chewed tobacco with a sneer so permanent. It didn't matter what his mouth was doing. They looked at Eli like he was already dead and just hadn't figured it out yet. Evening, Cyrus said, as if he were dropping by for supper. Sure hope you had time to think things over. Eli didn't move. Thought it over plenty. Came to the same answer. Cyrus stepped closer. You sure? Because I'd hate to burn a man's home down while he's inside it. Eli let the rifle drop into his arms and cocked it slow, deliberate. Then you better bring kindling. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Cyrus raised his hand. Whether to signal his men or to brush away the dust from his coat, Eli didn't care. The moment that hand twitched, Eli fired. The bullet struck the ground inches from Cyrus's boot. He staggered back with a curse, drawing his pistol, but Eli had already dropped behind the porch's cover. From inside the house, Adam returned fire through a narrow gap between the slats nailed to the window. The bullet hit one of the horses in the flank, causing it to rear violently. Its rider tumbled to the dirt with a crunch that sounded like ribs breaking. Another of Cyrus's men jumped down to help him, but a second shot from inside the cabin hit the ground near his knee. He scrambled for cover. Cyrus yelled, "Flank the house! Flush them out!" The other two men dismounted and moved around the sides, rifles ready. But Eli was already there. He slipped from the porch, ducked behind the barn, and cut across the back with practiced silence. As one of Cyrus's men rounded the corner, Eli stepped out from behind the woodpile and smashed the butt of his rifle into the man's face. Bone cracked. The man fell like a dropped sack of grain. Inside, Ruth pressed her back against the wall, baby Mercy cradled in her arms. Beth held the second revolver, hands shaking, while Adam crouched by the front window, ready to fire again. "He's coming around the back," Adam hissed. "No," Ruth said, voice hoarse. "Eli's back there." They heard shouting. Then another shot. Then silence. The front door exploded inward. Cyrus stood there with smoke trailing from the barrel of his pistol. His boot had done most of the work, splintering the frame wide enough for him to shove through. He stepped inside slowly, like he'd been invited, gun pointed straight at Ruth. Beth fired. The shot went wide and buried itself in the wall. Cyrus didn't flinch. "Drop it," he said, "or I'll shoot your mother first." Beth didn't move. "Drop it." Ruth reached out, trembling, and slowly lowered the barrel of the gun in Beth's hands. Beth let go like it had burned her. The revolver clattered to the floor. Cyrus took another step forward, and then something shifted behind him. Eli. He came through the broken door like a storm, slamming into Cyrus from behind with such force the pistol fired wild into the ceiling. They struggled, grunting, fists flying, Cyrus fighting like a man possessed. But Eli was taller, broader, and too furious to feel pain. He drove Cyrus back into the kitchen table, the two of them crashing onto it in a heap. The table split. Mercy started crying. Ruth grabbed the baby and pulled the children toward the back of the cabin. She opened the trapdoor under the rug and pointed. "Get in, now!" They climbed down, one by one, into the root cellar Eli had cleared just that morning. A few crates of canned food, a single lantern, and just enough room to breathe. Ruth passed Mercy into Beth's arms, then turned back, hesitating. Upstairs, the fight raged. Cyrus reached for a knife at his belt, slashed it across Eli's forearm. Eli roared, then headbutted him. Blood poured from Cyrus's nose. He scrambled. For his gun, Ruth didn't think. She grabbed the fallen revolver and fired. Cyrus collapsed. Not dead. Not yet. But the bullet had torn into his shoulder, and he lay there stunned, gasping, trying to move his arm and failing. Eli crawled to the revolver, kicked it away, then leaned over Cyrus. "You come back here again," Eli growled, voice low and shaking. "And I won't stop her next time," Cyrus coughed. "You think you've won? The law's on my side." Eli leaned closer. "The law's 20 miles east and sleeping sound. Out here, all that matters is what's right." He bound Cyrus's hands behind his back and dragged him outside like trash. Two of his men had already fled. The third, bruised and dazed, raised his hands when Eli stepped out. "I didn't sign up for this," the man muttered. "Then ride." He did. Eli turned back toward the cabin, and for the first time in a long while, the silence that followed didn't carry weight, just relief. He walked back inside, found Ruth still holding Mercy, her hands shaking violently. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded, breath ragged. "Are we safe?" Eli didn't lie. For now. They burned what they had to, dragged what they could. Left Cyrus tied in the barn with water, food, and enough rope to make sure he'd be found when someone finally came looking. The next day, Eli rode into town with Ruth and the children. They found the sheriff, real one this time, and laid it all out. Beth spoke with clarity beyond her years. Adam backed her story. Ruth didn't cry, didn't plead. She just told the truth, and the sheriff believed them. "I'll send men," he promised. "And if I find out you're lying, I'll know where to find you." Eli stared him down. "You won't need to." 3 days later, they returned home. The cabin was still standing. The ground still held the blood it had taken, but something about the air had changed, as if it had accepted them now. These people who had fought for one another not because they had to, but because love demands it. That night, they sat together on the porch. Beth held Mercy. Adam whittled wood. Ruth watched the horizon with tired eyes that still managed to sparkle. Eli sat beside her. "You'll have to decide what to do next." "I already did," she said. "I'm staying." Eli nodded. "And not just because I don't have anywhere else to go," she added. "Because this feels like home." He looked at her, not speaking. Then Ruth reached out and took his hand in hers. "You saved us. Not just with your gun. You believed me. You let me be more than what they saw." He squeezed her hand gently. "You were always more, just took the right place to see it. But peace doesn't linger long on old soil." The next morning, a letter arrived, delivered by a boy on horseback, too nervous to even dismount. Ruth opened it with trembling fingers. The handwriting was familiar. "You'll regret this. There's more than law. There's blood." No signature, just a symbol drawn in the corner, a snake eating its tail. Ruth's face went pale. Eli took the letter from her and read it, his jaw tightening. "What is it?" Adam asked. Ruth whispered. "It means he has brothers." The days that followed were quieter, but never still. Eli reinforced the doors, rebuilt the table, dug deeper into the root cellar until it stretched beneath the entire cabin. He and Adam hauled stone from the creek bed and laid it along the perimeter, like a wall no one had asked for, but everyone needed. Ruth patched every curtain, restitched baby clothes, boiled soap from ash and fat, and sang while she worked. Not cheerful songs, not yet, but steady ones, like the kind that kept a heart, beating through bad weather. The children helped without being asked. Beth woke early to sweep the porch and hushed Mercy when she fussed. Adam stood taller each morning, eyes sharper, quicker with his hands. Even little Elias, just old enough to know the difference between work and play, followed Eli around like a shadow with a wooden hammer of his own. But the letter lingered. It stayed folded in the drawer beside Ruth's side of the bed, its message carved into her mind. That symbol, an Ouroboros, a snake devouring itself, wasn't just a warning. It was a mark, a family seal of sorts, one Cyrus hadn't used publicly in years. Ruth had seen it once before, when she was 15, hiding behind her mother's skirts in a courthouse. A man had pulled his coat aside, not to show a badge, but a burn on his hip, that same circle of hunger and cruelty, and her mother had turned to stone. Eli didn't ask questions she didn't want to answer, but he watched her more closely, moved through the house with more caution. At night, he double-bolted the doors, not for fear, but preparation. The threat didn't come fast. That was the problem, the waiting. Like a storm you hear rumbling over, distant hills but can't quite see. And then, a week later, it started. Eli had gone into town for supplies. Ruth stayed behind with the children, Mercy curled against her chest in the sling, Beth sweeping the back porch, Adam feeding the goats. It was mid-afternoon, sun just beginning to dip when Ruth saw the rider. He didn't come down the path. He came through the trees. Not like he was lost, but like he knew a shortcut no one had taught him. He rode a black horse with a jagged white stripe down its neck, and his hat was tipped low, but she saw the brand on his jacket as he neared. The same Ouroboros stitched in red thread above his pocket. Beth was closest to the house. Ruth didn't shout, just caught her eye and motioned. Beth understood. She ran inside without a word, gathered the children and started down into the cellar. Mercy began to whimper, but Beth hushed her, rocking gently. Ruth stayed on the porch. The man stopped at the gate. He didn't cross. "You Ruth?" he called. She didn't answer. "I said," he repeated. "You Ruth Gable?" "Depends who's asking." He smiled, lazy. "Name's Silas Vane." Her stomach turned. "Cyrus's brother." "Half-brother," he corrected. "Other half's meaner." "What do you want?" "Just came to talk." "Then talk from there." Silas dismounted slowly, like he expected her to run. "Heard. My brother got himself tied up like a sow and left in a barn. Thought I'd come see the woman brave enough to shoot him. I shot him to protect my children, not for sport." He stepped forward. "He said you were stubborn, and I say you've had your talk. Go." He tilted his head. "See, that's the problem. I'm not like Cyrus. He tried force. Never did have much patience. Me? I got all the time in the world, and a lot more men." Ruth's eyes narrowed. "You planning something?" "Oh no. Planning's too formal. I just let things happen. Fire's funny that way. Doesn't need a reason to burn." He tipped his hat. "Just wanted to introduce myself." And then, just like that, he turned and rode off. Eli returned near nightfall to find Ruth standing by the front fence, her rifle over her shoulder and her face pale with rage. He dropped the bags on the porch and didn't ask until the children were asleep. "Tell me." She told him everything. Silas's visit, the warning, the slow promise of violence wrapped in politeness. Eli listened without speaking, jaw set, eyes darker than she'd ever seen. "We should run," she whispered. "Pack up, go east." He shook his head. "And leave. This place to them? No. They come here thinking they can burn everything down just because no one's ever told them no. We tell them no. Eli, this is home now. I don't run from home." The next morning, he rode to the sheriff. But the sheriff wasn't there. He'd gone south on a posse, chasing rustlers, and wouldn't be back for days. The deputy, left behind, was barely old enough to shave and looked terrified the second Eli mentioned the name Vane. "They've got land out west of the ridge," the boy mumbled. "No one goes near it, not even the law." Eli rode home with nothing but a heavier weight in his gut. The next day, strange things began to happen. Their well ran dry, not from use, but from a dead possum stuffed down the shaft. Their barn doors were unlatched in the night, and 2 goats went missing. A bundle of sticks was tied outside their front door with red thread, shaped like the snake again. And then, on the 3rd night, fire. Eli woke to the smell of smoke. The edge of the barn had been lit, flames licking up toward the hayloft. He and Adam ran barefoot into the dark, throwing buckets of water until their arms gave out. Beth stood with Ruth on the porch, the baby pressed to her chest, both girls shaking. The fire died before it took the whole barn, but the message was clear. They weren't done. Not by a long shot. The next morning, Eli dug 2 holes behind the house. Not for bodies, for posts, thick cedar-cut beams set deep in the earth. One held a bell, the other held a lantern. "You see fire or men coming, you ring the bell," he told Adam. "You see the lantern lit, you run to the cellar." "What if it's too late?" Adam asked. Eli didn't answer. That night, Ruth found him in the shed, oiling the rifle she hadn't seen him use since Cyrus came. He was quiet, steady. "I didn't want this life," she said. He nodded. "I didn't either." Do you regret letting us stay? Eli set the rifle down and looked at her. Do you regret knocking on my door? She didn't speak. He reached for her hand. I don't care how many children you have, or what anyone says about you. You belong here, with me. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. Then we fight, and they did. The next night, Silas returned, with 4 men, faces covered in bandanas, torches in hand. But this time, Eli was waiting in the trees. When the first man stepped toward the fence, a warning shot cracked through the air. Silas paused. All right, he shouted. Guess we'll do it the hard way. But before he could signal the attack, another shot rang out, from behind him, then another, and another. Ruth had taken the children into the cellar, but Beth stayed above, perched in the loft, with Eli's second rifle, hands trembling, but aim true. Silas turned, furious. You brought a child to a gunfight. She brought herself, Eli called. Chaos erupted. The veins fired wild, but they hadn't expected resistance from both sides. Eli moved like smoke through the trees, his rifle flashing in and out of moonlight. Beth hit one in the shoulder. He screamed and dropped his gun. Another ran straight into the pit Eli had dug near the barn, a crude trap, but deep enough to break a leg. Silas realized too late they were outnumbered, not in bodies, but in will. He fled. Ruth emerged as the dust settled, rifle in hand, Mercy still tucked against her chest. She walked past the groaning man in the trap, past the others limping off into the dark, and stood beside Eli. Beth climbed down from the loft, pale but alive. They'll come back, Ruth said quietly. Eli nodded. Then we'll be ready. But even he couldn't know what was coming next, because Silas hadn't just run. He'd ridden west, and when he returned, it wouldn't be with 4 men, it would be with 20. The quiet after battle is never peace. It's breath held, muscles taut, a waiting game with no finish line in sight. The children had stopped asking questions, but not because they understood. They were simply too afraid of the answers. Even Elias, who once sang while gathering eggs, walked silent now, eyes darting to the windows with every gust of wind. Ruth tried to keep them steady. She told stories at night and braided Beth's hair each morning, as if a ribbon and a prayer could stop a bullet. But she watched the road every evening with the same haunted stillness Eli carried in his shoulders. Eli built a second trap near the front gate and strung bells along the trees with fishing wire. Adam helped him carve spikes from fence posts. Beth practiced reloading in the dark with her eyes closed. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a fortress with children inside. They expected Silas to return that week. He didn't. Instead, days passed in a crawling stillness, thick with the kind of dread that made even sleep feel dangerous. Ruth lay awake most nights, nursing Mercy, while her thoughts drifted to darker things. If they came again and Eli fell, would she have the strength to protect them? Could she fire a second shot at another man's brother? The question she feared more was simpler. Would it matter? Then, on the 6th morning after the ambush, they found the calf butchered. Its remains were strung across the fence line like a message, blood soaked into the dirt. Ruth sent Beth and the others inside before they could see. Eli didn't say a word as he cleaned it up, hands red to the elbow. That night, he sat on the porch alone until the stars vanished, listening for hoofbeats. That never came. It wasn't war, not yet. It was fear, stretched thin over days, pulled tight until it started to snap, and it snapped when Sheriff Tim Calloway returned to town. Eli rode in at dawn and found him at his desk, boots kicked up, sipping cold coffee. The moment he heard the veins were involved, the sheriff stiffened like a man expecting ghosts to walk through his door. You should have told me sooner, Calloway muttered. I did. The sheriff scrubbed a hand over his beard. And there, threatening your family. They already set fire to my barn, tried to flank the house. You shoot anyone. Shot at 'em. Beth winged one in the shoulder. The girl? Eli nodded. Hell, the sheriff sighed. You realize if they die, It's your word against theirs. And they've got land, money, connections. I've got kids. And I've got a town that's scared spitless of the Vanes. I send deputies out there. I'm signing their death warrants. Then send me with a badge. Tim looked at him. Long. Hard. You sure about this? I'm sure they'll... Come again. And next time, they won't ride off. So the sheriff did something Ruth hadn't expected. He gave Eli the badge. A temporary deputization, scribbled in haste and signed with hands that shook more than they should have. If you catch them in the act, he said, you have the law on your side, but don't go hunting them. You hear me? Don't start it. Eli tucked the paper into his coat and rode home with steel in his eyes. But someone had already started something. When he got back, Ruth stood by the smokehouse with her fists clenched. The smokehouse door had been pried open. Inside, every piece of meat they'd cured for winter was gone. Not stolen, spoiled. Someone had slit the sacks, poured oil over the salt, and dumped the meat into the dirt. Eli said nothing. He built another trap. That night, Ruth wrote a letter, not to the sheriff, to the pastor, who'd refused to marry her and Eli. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She asked for firewood and lard and a spare Bible, if he could spare it. 2 days later, the items appeared at the edge of their land, bundled in cloth. No note. Just charity delivered in silence. Others followed. A sack of flour left by their gate, a pair of boots for Adam. 2 dresses, mended and clean, folded on a stone near the river path. None of it was labelled, none of it acknowledged. But Ruth knew what it meant. The town was watching, and someone, maybe many someones, had decided they weren't going to let the Vanes burn a woman and her children alive just to make a point. That gave her hope. Hope. That vanished the moment the first shot was fired. It came just past dusk, a single crack through the dark. Eli rushed out with his rifle. Ruth followed, heart pounding. Nothing at first, then a moan. Adam. They found him just past the fence, lying beside a pile of chopped wood. The bullet had grazed his thigh, not deep, but enough to knock him off his feet. Eli carried him inside while Ruth tore strips from her apron and pressed them against the wound. Adam gritted his teeth but didn't cry. Did you see them? Eli asked. Adam shook his head. Just the shot, then I hit the ground. Ruth glanced at the lantern post. Unlit. They didn't come close, Eli muttered. Just a warning. He turned to Ruth. They're watching. She nodded. And waiting. The next day, they found the trap empty but triggered. Someone had stepped into it, then pried the teeth apart and left a single coin behind, a silver dollar, polished to shine. Beth said, what no one else would, they're playing with us. Eli built a wall, logs, stacked waist-high, circling the barn and main house. It took 3 days and every spare hand. The children worked without complaint. Ruth cut more fabric into strips for torches. Beth kept watch from the loft, eyes never leaving the tree line. And then, at last, came the storm. It rolled in without thunder. Just the low, steady drumbeat of hooves, dozens of them, cresting the hills at once. Ruth saw the dust before the riders, 20 men, maybe more, all bearing the mark. Silas rode at the front, mouth curled in a mockery of a smile. This time, he didn't stop at the gate. He rode straight up to the wall. Eli stood at the top, rifle cradled. That's far enough, Silas chuckled. Come now, Eli. We both knew this was coming. Eli didn't move. Turn around. You shot at my men. They shot first. You're harboring a criminal. She's my wife. She's a murderer. She's a mother. Silas tipped his hat back. And she's going to pay for what she did to Cyrus. He lived. Silas smiled wider. He won't forget. Ruth stepped up beside Eli. Neither will I. Silas's face darkened. Last chance. Eli raised his rifle. We don't need chances. We've got reasons. The first torch flew. Before anyone could speak, It landed on the wall, but the wood was still too green to catch. Ruth turned, grabbed the water pail, doused it before flames could spread. Then came the second, and the third. And suddenly, it wasn't a siege. It was a wildfire. Eli shouted for the children. Beth and Adam raced to the cellar, dragging Elias behind them. Ruth followed with Mercy. Eli stayed above. Shots rang out, real ones this time. Eli returned fire, hitting a rider's shoulder. The man screamed and fell, but there were too many. Beth clutched the baby as Ruth lit the lantern on the post. "They're coming!" she shouted. Eli saw the signal and fell back, diving into the shed as bullets whistled past. The barn caught first, dry hay finally taking the flame. Heat licked up the roof. Smoke coiled into the sky. Then came a new sound. Whistles. From the trees and horses. From behind. A second group of riders, but not the Vanes. Sheriff Calloway at the front. He rode in like judgment itself, deputies behind him, rifles drawn. He shouted for the Vanes to drop their weapons. Silas turned, shocked, and drew instead. The sheriff fired once. Silas's hat flew off. His horse reared. He toppled into the dirt. Chaos. Some of the Vanes fled. Others fired blindly. Deputies spread like fire breaks, cutting them off. In minutes, the fight was over. Silas lay in the dirt, bleeding from his side, alive but groaning. Ruth stepped out from behind the shed. The sheriff turned to her. "Is this him?" She nodded. Eli lowered his rifle. Adam emerged from the cellar, limping but smiling. Beth held Mercy tighter. The nightmare wasn't over, but the fire was out, for now. Silas Vane didn't die. A clean shot through his side had spared all the parts men needed to live and left intact, all the ones they used to hate. The deputies dragged him back to town unconscious, and Eli rode behind them with his rifle slung across his back, not out of pride or triumph, but because he couldn't trust that the law would be strong enough without him watching. Ruth stayed behind with the children, standing amid the smoke and splinters of what used to be their barn. Gripping Mercy so tightly, the child let out a squeak and pressed closer. Her legs shook, but her voice stayed calm. She told the children, what was gone could be rebuilt, what was burned could be replanted, and what tried to kill them hadn't succeeded, and that counted for something. It rained the next day. Not a storm, just a soft, steady rain that soaked the ashes and flattened the grass where Silas's men had ridden in. It dripped from the eaves where the barn roof used to be and ran in, rivulets over the deep tracks their horses left behind. Ruth sat beside Eli on the porch, not speaking. Mercy was asleep on her chest, and Adam sat with his leg bandaged, sharpening a stick into something like a spear. The fire was gone, but the heat hadn't left her body. It smouldered low now, a quiet fury that no longer needed words. Eli finally said what they were both thinking. "He'll get out." Ruth didn't answer. You know his people. Lawyers, judges, bribes. He'll lie there with his smug little smile. Tell him we opened fire first, that it was just a misunderstanding, over a piece of land, and they'll believe him. Her voice was steady. He looked at her. They'll want to. 3 deputies came back by sundown. They said Silas was locked up and 2 of his men were being treated for wounds. They didn't say for how long. They didn't promise anything. Beth asked what would happen now. No one answered her. That night, the neighbours came. First came Mary Ann, a midwife with hands like bark and a face that hadn't smiled in 10 years. She brought 2 loaves of bread and a wool blanket. Then came old Hank Davis with a bucket of nails, a few boards, and a gruff nod. One by one, people filed in quietly, no fanfare, no grand declarations. Just quiet help, hammering new beams, dragging buckets of water, replanting the corner of the garden the fire had scorched. Nobody said it outright, but Ruth could feel it. The town had turned. For the first time in her life, she was being helped without being asked what she'd done wrong first. Still, no one looked her in the eye. Except the pastor. He came last, boots, muddy, eyes rimmed red, and he stood at the gate for a long time before Eli noticed him and waved him in. The pastor didn't speak right away, just took off his hat, held it in both hands. "I read your letter," he finally said. Ruth looked up from where she was scrubbing soot off the wall. "I failed you," he said. Eli stepped forward, but Ruth raised her hand. "Let him." The pastor swallowed. "When you came to me asking to be married, I saw your past. I didn't see your heart. I didn't see your strength. I didn't see what kind of mother you are, what kind of woman. But I see it now." Beth stood behind her, still as stone. "I can't fix what I did," the pastor went on, voice cracking. "But if you'll still have me, I'd like to offer the ceremony you asked for. No charge, no judgment. Just truth." Ruth looked at Eli. He gave the smallest of nods. The wedding took place that Sunday, on the very porch where Eli had first let her sit and warm her feet after a rain. The children wore mismatched clothes, Adam's shirt too big, Beth's boots too tight, but they stood proud. Ruth held Mercy in one arm and Eli's hand in the other. There was no music, no crowd, just a few neighbors gathered near, heads bowed, wind rustling the new canvas stretched where the barn once stood. When the pastor asked if she took Eli as her husband, Ruth didn't hesitate. "I already did," she said, voice clear and steady, "long before today." And when Eli was asked, his voice cracked as he replied, "Forever." They kissed to the sound of birds, not bells, and when it was done, Beth ran forward and hugged them both at once, Mercy squealing with delight between them. It wasn't a feast, but neighbors brought what they could. Jam, eggs, pickled vegetables, a pie with the crust already broken. They shared it under the open sky, and for a few hours it felt like nothing in the world could touch them again. But peace is never permanent in the West. Not where men like Silas Vane still breathe. It happened 2 weeks later, quiet as fog, a note nailed to the porch during the night, with 4 words burned into the paper. "He's walking. Coming home." The jail had let him go. Self-defense, they claimed. No one could prove the first shot came from his men. One of the deputies had changed his statement. Another had vanished altogether. The pastor tried to rally protest, but it was too late. Silas was free. Worse, he was angry, and the law had washed its hands clean. Eli wanted to run. Ruth didn't. "We can't uproot again," she said, staring down at Mercy. "The children are growing. The town is with us now. If we leave, we teach them fear wins." "But what if it does?" She looked him dead in the eye. "Then let it come. Let it see what kind of mother I am." So Eli built one more wall, not of wood this time, but of words, letters, appeals. He sent one to the governor, another to the marshal. He even sent word to a reporter he knew from the war days. "They'll ignore us," Ruth said. "Maybe," he replied, "but maybe not all of them." And one didn't. 3 days after the last letter was sent, a stranger rode into town. A woman, dressed in a suit, boots scuffed, hair tied in a no-nonsense bun. She introduced herself as Miss Cora Langley, journalist from Chicago, said she'd heard whispers of a widow turned outlaw mother turned frontier bride, and if half the story was true, she wanted to write the rest of it. Ruth didn't trust her at first, but Cora didn't flinch at the mention of blood, didn't blink when she saw Adam's scar, didn't recoil when Ruth told her the truth about Cyrus and the baby that never had a name. She listened, wrote, then asked if she could stay a while. So she did, and each day she wrote more, interviews, sketches, observations. When she finally left, she left behind a promise. "I'll make sure people know what was done to you, and what you did anyway." A week passed, then another. The children started to smile again. Beth sang while cleaning. Adam limped but raced Elias around the pasture anyway. The townsfolk offered greetings now. Some even let their children wave from wagons as they passed. And then came the letter, addressed to Ruth. Stamped official. It was from a woman named Abigail Lawton, head of a foundation back east that supported frontier families, widows, and those displaced by violence. She'd read Cora's piece, wanted to help, offered supplies, money, even teachers for the children. Ruth read the letter 3 times before setting it down. "We don't need charity," she said. Eli picked it up. "This isn't charity, this is justice." They accepted. That spring, a wagon arrived with crates of books, tools, medicines Ruth couldn't pronounce. A woman named Miriam came to teach the children. She stayed in the loft and played the piano at night on a keyboard they built from scraps, but none of it stopped the final blow. It came late one evening, when the sun had barely dipped below the hill. Beth had gone to gather eggs. She was only gone 10 minutes. Then she screamed. Eli was the first to reach her. She stood at the edge of the coop, eyes wide, hands trembling. Inside the coop, all the chickens dead, heads removed, laid out in a circle, and on the door, painted in blood, a single word, reckoning, Silas. He hadn't forgotten. He hadn't forgiven. He was still coming, and this time, Ruth knew. It wouldn't be just fire and bullets. He would try to break her spirit, and her children's. But as she held Beth that night, whispering promises, and rocking her like a baby, something hard and unshakable settled in her bones. She'd lost too much already. She wasn't going to lose this. Not her family, not her home, not again. And when Silas Vane came knocking, he'd find out what it meant to threaten a woman who had already walked through hell and kept walking. They took turns staying up through the nights, Eli on the porch with his rifle and Ruth with a knife beneath her apron, ready to gut the next man who stepped too close. The children were quieter. Adam refused to sleep with the lights out. Elias would not leave Ruth's side, even to use the outhouse. Beth stopped singing altogether. Mercy, too young to understand, but old enough to feel the change, became fussier by the day. It wasn't just the chickens. It was the silence that followed, a waiting kind of silence, thick like a snake in the rafters. And then came the letter, slipped beneath the front door in the middle of the night, sealed with red wax and folded crisp like something meant for a courtroom or a casket. Ruth opened it with hands that didn't tremble. 1 week. Leave, or I take back what's mine. No signature, no proof, but they didn't need it. Ruth called a meeting the next morning, just the family. They sat around the kitchen table, even Mercy in her cradle. The smell of burnt coffee in the air and dust floating through a ray of sun that made it all look too peaceful for what was coming. "We can run," Eli said again. "We'll find another town." Ruth looked at him. "Where we're strangers again." He had no answer. "I won't uproot the children again," she said. "I won't teach them that cowardice is survival." Adam leaned forward, jaw tight. "Then we fight." "You're 14, Ruth said. "I'm old enough." "No," she said. "You're not. But I am. And so is Eli." Beth's voice came out barely above a whisper. "But if he comes for us, then he'll find us standing." Ruth sent word to the pastor, to Miss Cora Langley, who had returned to Chicago but kept correspondence steady like clockwork. "To every soul who had brought bread or nails or pie, we may need you again," she wrote, "and this time come armed with more than kindness." 3 days before the deadline, Miriam, the teacher, left, not out of fear but to fetch her brother, a veteran from the war, now sheriff in another county. She promised she'd return with help. Ruth didn't hold her breath. 2 days before the deadline, old Hank Davis came by and reinforced the porch with thick beams. "If he's coming through, let him try this time," was all he said before leaving a shotgun on the step. The day before the deadline, Ruth took Beth and Mercy and rode into town. She bought flour, nails, and candles. Acted like nothing was wrong, but every storekeep watched her longer than they should have, and no one mentioned the letter. Not even the ones who had surely seen it nailed to the church door that morning. It read, "Judgment comes at sundown." She didn't tell Beth, just tightened her grip on the reins and headed home before the shadows grew too long. And when the sun dipped low the next day, when the chickens roosted and the sky bled orange, Ruth stood out front with Eli at her side and all 4 children behind them. They wore no armor, held no weapons in plain sight. But they stood and they waited. They heard him before they saw him. Hooves. Not many. 3 riders, maybe 4. Coming slow, like they owned the road. The dust they kicked up was the color of rust and death, and Ruth smelled whiskey before the men even came into view. Silas Vane wore black, a hat too clean, boots too polished. His face was pale from weeks in jail, but his eyes had lost none of their venom. He stopped 10 paces from the porch, his 2 remaining men flanking him. "You got my letter," he said. Ruth didn't blink. "I got it." "Then you know why I'm here." "I do." "You've taken something from me. Those children were never yours." "Not them," he said, stepping down from his horse. You belonged to me when you were 17, and desperate, when you thought any hand that reached out to help was a lifeline instead of a noose. You never owned me," he grinned. "You bore my child." Eli's hand twitched. Ruth stepped forward before he could act. "You buried that child," she said, voice level. "You buried me. I climbed out." Silas chuckled. "You think this land gives a damn about your climbing? You think these people do? They pity you, that's all." Poor Ruth with her brood of bastards and her bleeding heart. "Maybe," she said, "but they showed up, and they did. One by one, from the trees, from the path behind the barn, from the hills beyond the pasture. Dozens. Mary Ann with her thick gloves and sharper tongue, Hank with his rifle, the pastor with his Bible, and a look in his eye that could gut a man cleaner than any blade, and Miriam, back early, with 3 riders behind her wearing badges and holsters that looked well used. Silas turned, scowling. "You threaten this family." "Again," Miriam said from her horse, voice carrying, "and I swear to God, I'll bury you so deep no memory could dig you up." "You have no jurisdiction," he snapped. Her brother raised his badge. "I do." Silas spat, but he saw it then. The line had moved. The town had shifted. He wasn't the shadow people feared anymore. Ruth was the light they followed. He climbed, back on his horse, slow and seething. "This isn't over," he said. "It is," Ruth answered. "It was over the moment you let go of the child and picked up the bottle." And he rode off. No shots fired. No blood. Just silence and the wind moving through tall grass as if breathing again after years of holding its breath. That night, Eli sat beside Ruth while the children slept. Mercy curled between them, the others in bed under one roof, one name, one home. "What now?" he asked. She looked toward the dark horizon, where nothing moved. "Now we live," she said. Cora's article went national. Then came letters, donations, offers to write books, to film her life, to brand her tragedy. She declined most, but she accepted funds to build a school, hired Miriam full-time. The children grew. Adam became a blacksmith, Beth a midwife. Elias ran the schoolhouse when Miriam retired. Mercy? She never remembered the fire, just the love that followed it. Ruth grew grey, then slower, then still. Eli held her hand through the last storm of her body's failing. She whispered something then. He never repeated what, but he said her eyes didn't close in pain. They closed in peace. The town still speaks of her, not in whispers anymore, but with pride, of the woman no man could break, of the mother who stayed, of the family no one believed in, until one man did, and never stopped.